We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 5th of June 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
The key message to Donald Trump is Germany is back on track. Germany will fulfill the obligations in terms of defense, and Germany is willing to strengthen their own competitiveness.
Germany's new chancellor is in Washington today. Can Merz and Trump steer transatlantic ties onto smoother ground? Bulgaria gets the green light for the euro, but after 7 elections in 3 years, is the country really ready to join the club? We'll hear how Rheinmetall has knocked Caring out of the Euro Stoxx 50, military muscle beating haute couture. Then,
if we hadn't sort of looked at it sceptically, you can imagine a scenario where you might have thought, well, actually, is life in Mariupol this sort of psychedelic array of new buildings and war memorials and, naval institutes and the drama theatre being rebuilt?
The Kremlin's latest weapon in Mariupol, a TikTok-friendly facade of normal life. We dig into Russia's social media spin. While Europe slams the brakes on Tesla, Norway puts the pedal down. What's fueling their love affair with Musk's motors? We scan the headlines across Asia, and in China, K-pop is back on the playlist. After years on mute, why the sudden change of tune? That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing a coalition crisis as Israel's opposition moves to dissolve parliament. The United States has vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, while all other members voted in favour. And the US is imposing new travel bans on citizens of 12 countries, with partial restrictions on 7 more, sparking international criticism. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, Germany's new chancellor, Friedrich Merz, touched down in Washington last night for a high-stakes meeting with US President Donald Trump. It's his first major foreign trip since taking office just a month ago, and comes at a tense time for transatlantic ties. Trade tensions, diverging approaches to Ukraine, and wrangling over NATO spending are all on the table. Well, can the two men reset the relationship, or are they heading for a collision course? I'm joined now by Stephen Erlanger, who's chief diplomatic correspondent for the New York Times covering Europe. He's currently in Berlin. Stephen, many thanks for joining us. This isn't an easy diplomatic debut. What's the state of play in US-German relations as Merz arrives?
Well, they're actually not too bad, to be honest. I mean, Merz is more of a Trump kind of person. He's a conservative. He's a businessman. He speaks almost perfect English. He's not even bringing his translator with him. Germany is a big, powerful country. The problem, if there is going to be a problem, is Trump is convinced Germany's not doing enough for defense. Merz has arguments now to that, having broken through the German debt brake issue. But there is the woke problem. There is this idea that J.D. Vance, the vice president, has. I don't think Trump particularly knows much about this or cares, but that Germany is restricting free speech. The Germans call this control of abusive speech, of Nazi speech, of racist speech. But for J.D. Vance, this is and abuse of power. And this is a big issue that may come up in the White House if Trump decides to do one of his usual worldwide wrestling television shows. He also may decide to be nicer. You never know with Trump.
Yeah, I mean, so the worry is he'll try and humiliate Merz as he tried with Zelensky and Ramaphosa with J.D. Vance's help. What's Merz's best strategy to avoid this?
Well, he's talked to Ramaphosa about what happened. He's talked to Macron. He's talked to Starmer. He's trying to plot this out. I think, as usual, the best strategy is you don't get into a fight with the president in the Oval Office, not on television. You just don't. I mean, if you swallow a little humiliation, okay. It's important to praise what Trump is doing. I'm sure you'll hear praise from Merz about Trump's efforts to end the Ukraine war, et cetera, et cetera. You'll have issues about tariffs, to be sure. There are trade issues because Trump really thinks Germany's screwing the United States. I mean, Trump doesn't seem to understand that there's this whole European Union that controls trade regulations. But I think Merz's main strategy is to be friendly, to have a joke or two. He's got a gift that no one will tell us what it is to bring to Trump, though it won't be an airplane, that's for sure. And I just think you have to keep your cool. And that's sometimes hard when you feel you're being insulted or your country's being insulted. But again, it's how does Trump and J.D. Vance play it? That's really the question that we don't know. I mean, Trump and blindsided Ramaphosa with this weird video. Who knows what could happen?
And I mean, of course, as we know, that video turned out to be fake. Let's just have a very quick skip through some of the items that are going to be on the table. So we know Trump's revived tariffs on European steel and cars. Is Merz in a position to push back, or do you think he'll play it pragmatic?
Well, I mean, there'll be a difference between public and private. I'm sure privately he's going to push back. Trump keeps saying the EU isn't negotiating in good faith, but the EU keeps offering a 0-0 trade deal on goods and gets no real response. Trump has made it clear he thinks the European Union is designed to screw America. You know, that it's an economic foe, not just a rival. So that's a difficult thing. But of course, Merz will push back, and he will make the case, as Germans always do, that BMW, for instance, in South Carolina, exports more cars from the United States than any other company based in the United States, that Germany has invested in American industry, in American factories, in building in America. So Germany has a case to make on that one.
Germany just signed off on a major tax reform. Do you think that will come up in DC? And could it shift the economic power balance within Europe too? Well,
we'll see what impact it has. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a very relevant topic here. I mean, Europe wants Germany to do more, lead more, pay more. That's been true for some time. Merz actually is embracing this idea, which Scholz, his predecessor, did not want to do, but it's very early days yet, I think. One of the other questions, if you don't mind, that people don't realize that will come up is the number of American troops based in Germany. I mean, they've been there since the war. There are a lot of them. They're expensive. There's hospitals, there's air bases, et cetera. Trump has, in his first term, talked about moving some of those troops out of Germany. I don't think this topic's going to go away. So I think this is going to come up also.
Now, as you mentioned, Ukraine is likely high on the agenda. What do we know about the two men's stance on support for Kyiv? Does it square up with each other?
Well, it's hard to know exactly what Trump's view is. I think Trump wants to wash his hands of it and hand it to the Europeans. And Merz has spoken about how Europe needs to step up and needs to do more. So I think one can elide that one pretty well. I mean, what the Ukrainians need and the Europeans know they still need is American operational intelligence. So I think one of the things Merz wants to do is ensure that even if the Americans don't provide any more money, they'll still provide this intelligence, and they'll still allow Ukraine and its allies to buy key weapon systems from the United States, and that Trump won't cut off Starlink, for example. I think the Germans and the Ukrainians want to ensure is that the Americans, even if they're not actively helping with weapons and so on, but that they're not hurting Ukraine.
And just briefly, how does this visit land with other EU capitals? Is Merz trying to position himself as a new continental bridge to the US?
Well, I think he is, but I think that people want him to. I mean, it's right now it's Maloney. So Maloney and or Merz or both together. Europe needs advocates inside the White House. So I think this is really an important visit. I mean, the problem for Merz in a way is tonal. After the J.D. Vance speech in Munich and after Trump and Vance beat up on Zelensky inside the Oval Office, Merz said probably words he regrets, that the West needs a new leader and we need to move on and so on. And I don't think the Trump people will allow him to forget that.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed. That's Stephen Erlanger in Berlin. He's the chief diplomatic correspondent for the New York Times there. This is The Globalist. It is 9:11 in Sofia, 7:11 here in London. Bulgaria has received the green light to join the Eurozone on January the 1st, 2026, becoming the 21st member of the single currency club. This decision comes after a period of political turbulence with 7 elections in 3 years and amidst a backdrop of public scepticism fuelled by concerns over inflation and national identity. As the country prepares for this significant economic shift, questions arise about the potential benefits and challenges of adopting the euro. Well, for more, I'm joined by Boriana Jambozova, who is a journalist based in Sofia. Boriana, it's good to have you back with us. What stood out in the European Commission's report on this, and how did Bulgaria manage to meet the benchmarks despite its political upheaval?
Hello, and thanks for having me. The European Commission's report was largely positive, and this time around the country has been able to meet all the necessary economic and legal requirements in order to adopt the euro. The interesting thing is actually that Bulgaria has committed to join the eurozone back in 2007. When the country entered the European Union, in fact. But since then, we've been failing to meet these criteria, which is basically a bunch of requirements regarding the inflation rate, also a budget deficit that shouldn't exceed 3% of GDP. We need to have a stable exchange rate, etc., etc. But for years, some EU member states have concerns, they still do, about the widespread corruption in the country, money laundering, and some issues that are more related to the political environment rather than the stability of the economy.
Because, of course, that exists in the domestic front too. There's public trust in institutions has been very shaky. How much political capital does the government actually have to push this through smoothly? We know that there have been many protests in recent weeks, particularly from the far right.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Bulgaria actually held 7 general elections for nearly 4 years now. So this past 4 years have been very turbulent politically, and currently we still have a very fragile coalition government that might collapse at any major challenge. For now, there's at least political agreement for the joining the eurozone. However, some populist and far-right parties, as you already mentioned, are trying to capitalize on public fears and exploit them, basically playing on concerns people have that prices, like joining the Eurozone, might drive up prices, inflation, and some of the costs might end up rising. And so it will the government will have a difficult task to convince people that they are able to run this process smoothly.
I wonder how organised that opposition movement is and if it does actually resonate beyond the fringe.
Well, it's a complicated issue, I would say. For the past few months, these attempts to fuel those public fears have intensified, and we've seen a wave of protest, which are also, increased by disinformation and propaganda campaigns. Trying to scare people that after joining the EU, this will have a negative impact. And in general, we see it in some of the polls. Basically, politicians have to do a much better job at convincing people that this is actually a positive development for the country, and it's a huge milestone. But so far, the populists have been doing well at, again, exploiting those fears. According to 2023 Eurobarometer poll, the country is basically divided on the issue, with 49% in favor of adopting the euro, but an equal percentage also is against it. So again, the government will have a difficult task of making sure everything runs smoothly with the transition and the conversions to the euro, and then convince people that this is in their interest.
But I mean, the local currency has been pegged to the euro for some time. So how much difference is this actually going to make to the person on the street and their spending power?
That's the thing. Economists are saying that the country can only benefit from adopting the euro. Basically, for example, the last country which joined the Eurozone was Croatia a few years ago. And what we can judge from their experience is that they saw expansion of their trade. They also joining the Eurozone also make the country more attractive to foreign investment. And of course, the businesses are welcoming this because this significantly reduced the transaction costs, because you no longer have to convert the local currency and pay an exchange rate for the euro. And you stated right that the country actually has been pegged to the euro and has a stable a rate to the euro for quite a while, so it shouldn't be such a big bump, this transition. Again, it's a matter of messaging and making a case for it to the public. And some businesses are already trying to point out the benefits to their customers.
Boriana, thank you. Thank you very much. That's Boriana Jambozova, who is a journalist based in Sofia. Now, still to come on the show.
German weapons manufacturer Rheinmetall has entered the Eurostoxx 50, the lineup of the 50 most valuable European companies, by knocking French luxury giant Kering off the list.
Hand grenades and handbags, how military hardware is muscling out high fashion. This is The Globalist.
Craft is its own reward, which is why at UBS we're honoured to work alongside over 50 of today's leading Nobel laureates, each an expert in the art of economic science, bringing you engaging discussions, actionable insights, and inspired solutions, all focused around the questions that shape our world today. For a better outlook, find a Nobel perspective. UBS. Banking is our craft.
It's 7:19 here in London. We're coming to you live from Midori House. This is The Globalist. I'm Georgina Godwin, and joining me in the studio right now is Simon Brooke, a journalist and a communications consultant. Simon, ostensibly we're here to look at today's newspapers, but first of all, we were having a brief dog chat. We both have crazy dogs, right?
We do, don't we? Exactly. Exhausting, but fun, you know.
Absolutely, but at least they keep us fit.
They certainly do, running around after them.
On to more serious things, and of course this news overnight that the US has vetoed the resolution for an unconditional Gaza ceasefire at the UN Security Council. Now, everybody else agreed. The US refuses to do so. Just unpack this for us.
Yeah, so The Guardian is one of a number of newspapers covering this story. And as you say, the UN Security Council called for an immediate, unconditional and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. It also called for the immediate for restrictions to be lifted on humanitarian aid coming into Gaza and for its safe distribution. Yeah, and the resolution was supported by the remaining 14 countries on the council. The UK also supported the resolution, as did France. Also China and Russia. It's not often that you see France, the UK, China and Russia backing the same motions, but this is certainly something that has happened. And the paper, The Guardian, reminds us that this is the fifth time that the US has vetoed a Security Council draft ceasefire resolution in order to protect Israel. It's happened also under the Biden administration. The argument is that the ceasefire demand is not directly linked to the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages by Hamas. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has described the resolution as counterproductive, and he said that Washington will not support any text that, he says, draws a false equivalence between Israel and Hamas or disregards Israel's right to defend itself. So, meanwhile, of course, this tragedy continues, played out on our TV screens.
And, of course, the US is criticising the fact that the UN will not designate Hamas as a terrorist organisation.
Yeah, this is obviously, again, a key sticking point that for the US and for many countries around the world, Hamas is designated as a terrorist organisation. But for a variety of political reasons, many UN members will not see it that way. So it seems sort of a legal nicety in some ways. Obviously, there are important security implications here. But as I say, meanwhile, while these contradictions play out in New York, people are suffering in Gaza.
Absolutely. Let's look at US financial news, because the FT is reporting that big investors are shifting away from the US markets. Why is this?
Well, this is, according to the FT, because of Donald Trump's trade war and a rapidly mounting government debt, and this has shaken confidence in American assets. The FT points out that these big investors are concerned about the escalating debt fuels, especially with this new bill that Trump hopes to get through Congress, his tax bill, which is forecast to add $2.4 trillion to Washington's debt over the next decade, and it's certainly increased pressure on US treasuries. And this concern, the anxieties about this US borrowing, of course, is not just an issue for the US. Given it's the world's biggest economy, it's going to affect us all. There's also a story that in Politico reporting that the Trump administration officials have delayed and redacted a government forecast because it predicts an increase in the nation's trade deficit in farm goods this year. And Politico points out that this runs counter to Trump's messaging that his economic policies, including his beloved tariffs, will reduce US trade imbalances. So I think the question is, as I say, it will affect other economies around the world. But when and how will it also affect American voters, who are looking to put gas in the car and food on the table? These big issues in the capital markets and the bond markets will eventually filter through.
And there does seem to be a certain amount of buyer's remorse from Republicans that voted for his big, beautiful bill too, with people suddenly realising what economic impact it's going to have at town halls across the country.
Exactly, and it does, as you say, that support does seem to be fragmenting. So it'll be interesting to see whether Trump will have to get it through. We've also seen this TACO, Trump always those chickens out meme, haven't we, this week? So will he actually have to dilute this big, beautiful bill, make it slightly less big and slightly less beautiful?
It's very clever, isn't it? Because as we've seen time and time again, what he really responds to is mockery, and what he needs is ego massaging. And once people skewer that with things like this taco meme, it makes him insane.
It does. He's had a real go at journalists who have been using this, but it is true. And the problem is, of course, it's the boy who cried wolf. The more he shouts and stamps his feet, the more people other countries, other governments that he's supposed to be negotiating with are thinking, actually, it doesn't matter after all, really.
Yeah. Let's have a look now at Ukraine, and particularly Russia, and the fact that a Times columnist, Juliet Samuel, says ludicrous legal posturing won't stop Russia. What's her argument?
Yes, well, she points out that Finland destroyed its landmines in 2015. It had a stockpile of them along its 800-mile border with Russia. And this is because in 2012, the Helsinki government became the last signatory to something called the Ottawa Convention. And this is an initiative actually originally promoted by Diana, Princess of Wales. And it requires members, and that includes the UK, but not interestingly the US, to refrain from making, stockpiling or using anti-personnel landmines. OK, that was then, this is now. And the question that Juliet Samuel raises is, should we be doing this? This year, Finland, the Baltic states and Poland will leave the Ottawa Convention. Norway and Lithuania, she reports, are also leaving the 2010 Oslo Convention banning cluster munitions. So the point is, I suppose, if we are in this increased military situation, Russia launching the most devastating attacks on Ukraine and looking at other European countries, is it time to leave perhaps the niceties of things like the Ottawa Convention?
And of course, it's too late for Ukraine because you're not allowed to leave if you're in the middle of a war.
So this is the tragedy, absolutely. So a very, very difficult situation for them, and an incredibly difficult moral question for governments around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're also looking here at the Attorney General here in Britain.
Yeah, so talking of the importance of international law, Lord Hermer, who is the UK's Attorney General, has emphasised the need for international law. But as I say, the question is, does that work if other people aren't backing international law and complying with it? There is an argument that, we are fighting with one hand behind our backs. It also shows how here in the UK, and I think the US and other countries, how the question of international law is becoming a political one, because Robert Jenrick, a prominent Tory, and many would say very much his eyes on the Tory leadership, has made Lord Hermer's backing for international law and some pretty controversial figures that Lord Hermer has represented, very much an issue in party politics, here in the UK. So, it'll be interesting to see how this whole question of to what extent do we abide by international law, or to what extent do we just have to say we're in a new terrain now and it's no longer so relevant.
I've been spending a lot of time over the last few months with Philippe Sands, the international human rights lawyer. We've both been on the sort of book festival.
East West Street, amazing book.
Fantastic book. And a new one on the Chagos Islands. And of course, he led that whole legal case, very much involved in sort of terms about genocide in that book, East West Street, and crimes against humanity and so on. And he keeps emphasising, and I've heard him speak many, many times over the last few months, about how important international law is, and to prosecute these things, to go through the courts.
Absolutely, and this is the problem. If you are the UK or the US or European countries who who do abide by international law, this is what prevents wars, we hope. But as I say, this is the challenge. Then is if you're dealing with countries like Russia
who don't care,
are we then do we stick to our moral position, or do we have to play dirty really just to match them and overcome them, perhaps, so that we have international law in the long run?
I mean, talking of Hermer, though, these attacks on him, the Attorney General here, do seem to be personal. They are criticising clients he's represented in the past before his current position as Attorney General. But of course, his defence is that it's the cab rank principle. As a barrister, you just take the next person.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because there's a lot of that thing in politics where it's not necessarily the detail, it's the feel. And I think you can see how reform the UK, here in the UK, and this kind of thing is evident in the US to some extent, that it's the feel that here is somebody who is a senior person in government who is representing people who are not like us, who are opposed to us, who threaten our way of life. And you can see how Lord Hermer, in many ways, he did actually have to apologise for describing people who were criticising international law as something like echoing the arguments in Germany in the 1930s. So he had to apologise for that. But you can see how he can be used by populist or other politicians as a way of attacking the government, the establishment, if you like.
Simon, we don't have a lot of time left for what I consider possibly to be the most important story on the news agenda today. Can you tell me what the BBC's reporting from the Rijksmuseum?
This was your idea, Georgina.
I was hoping to blame it on you because
No,
I am far too genteel to ever bring up anything like this.
Absolutely. But it is fascinating. Yes, this 200-year-old condom is in mint condition, according to the Rijksmuseum. How quite you decide it's in mint condition without
testing it.
Exactly, I don't know.
It's Schrodinger's cat, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But apparently it does work. So the curators who discovered it were laughing. They said, "Well, you would do, wouldn't it? Wouldn't you really?" But yeah, it has been tested with UV light and ascertained that it hasn't been used. Phew. Well, get the rubber gloves on. So that's a bit of a relief, isn't it? But
it's got a picture of a nun and 3 clergymen on it.
Yeah, that's going to get your motor running, isn't it?
And apparently it might have been like a souvenir from a Parisian brothel.
Absolutely. So there are tremendous opportunities, aren't there? So yeah, apparently it bears the inscription "Voilà mon choix," meaning in French, of course, "There is my choice." So I suppose, is that a woman's right to choose or something? Early reproductive.
Fantastic.
Law,
I think brothels here are missing a trick on branding. Honestly, condoms could be making a lot of money.
Advertising on the side.
Yeah,
the thing.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea.
It's the way forward.
Simon, thank you very much indeed. That's Simon Brooke. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Israel's opposition, led by Yesh Atid, is moving to dissolve parliament amid internal coalition tensions over ultra-Orthodox military exemptions. Benjamin Netanyahu's fragile majority is under threat as key allies demand new concessions. The US has vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for an unconditional ceasefire in Gaza, despite all 14 other members voting in favour. Washington claims the measure would derail diplomatic efforts and highlights the UN's failure to label Hamas a terrorist group. The US is imposing sweeping travel bans from the 9th of June on citizens of 12 countries, with partial restrictions on 7 more, and is tightening foreign student visa rules at Harvard. Trump cited a recent mass shooting in Colorado by an Egyptian national, whose country's not on the list, as justification, sparking global backlash. And Tanzania has begun restricting access to social media platform X, citing pornographic content that violates national values. The move follows rising political tension and the hacking of the national police account, prompting fears of digital repression ahead of elections. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, for a closer look behind the headlines, here's Monocle's Paris bureau chief Simon Bouvier on Rheinmetall knocking caring out of the Euro Stoxx 50.
There's a changing of the guard at Europe's biggest stock index, and it's emblematic of the times that we're living in. German weapons manufacturer Rheinmetall has entered the Euro Stoxx 50, the lineup of the 50 most valuable European companies, by knocking French luxury giant Kering off the list. It's indicative of the current economic climate, in which once rock-steady luxury groups are now facing headwinds and dimming sales, a situation compounded by Trump-era tariffs. Meanwhile, Europe's defense firms are seeing turbocharged investment. The fortunes of the continent's defense sector have been on an upward trajectory ever since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. And more recently, the uncertainty of U.S. strategic support, which is forcing European governments to up their arms spending and buy local. Since January, Rheinmetall's stock price has roughly tripled, while Kering's has sunk by nearly 30%. Similarly, LVMH's valuation has slipped, while aerospace giants Dassault Aviation and Leonardo continue to gain altitude.
That was Monocle's Paris bureau chief Simon Bouvier. And for more from Monocle's editors and correspondents around the world, do sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. Since its occupation by Russian forces in early 2022, the once thriving port city of Mariupol in Ukraine has become a symbol of Russia's ruinous and destructive invasion of the country. But CNN journalist Claire Sebastian has recently published a report that shows content creators are flocking to the city and painting a rosy picture of life with the support of the Kremlin. Monocle's Julia Lassica spoke to Sebastian to find out more.
If you look at the comments on a lot of these posts, which of course we've analysed really closely, you can see that the political divisions come out. You see a lot of people saying, no, Mariupol's Ukraine, and then Russians sort of celebrating what they're seeing. I think there is a sort of dystopian element to this. Russia is trying to sell the benefits of its occupation to Russians. Some of that may be in part to bring them to Mariupol. We see not only efforts to do that through sort of positive PR about the occupation, but also things like mortgage rates. You probably know that mortgage rates in Russia are just extraordinarily high. I mean, unaffordably high. 29, 30% is the market rate at the moment, but they're offering mortgage rates of 2% in Mariupol. So obviously, I mean, you can't refuse something like that if you're trying to buy a home. So there's that, I think, to try to distill within the people who've stayed in Mariupol a sense that this is it now, this is their life, and Russia takes credit for, for example, rebuilding the drama theatre that it destroyed. It's this sort of narrative flipping that we see. So it's that, and I think, look, we see a lot of it on TikTok, which isn't really that available in Russia. You need a VPN to use it. And so I think there is an element of appealing to the sort of the Western viewers as well, through just the sheer volume you see of this content. I mean, we came across this just by going onto TikTok and other social networks, and this is what we saw. And if we hadn't sort of looked at it skeptically, you can imagine a scenario where you might have thought, well, actually, is life in Mariupol this sort of psychedelic array of new buildings and war memorials and, naval institutes and the drama theatre being rebuilt? So I think that's part of what's happening as well.
And what's the long-term strategy? Why is Russia doing this? Is it in order to solidify a presence there because maybe you have a sense of insecurity? Do you feel like that sense of insecurity? Or is it sort of to make things complicated later on, in terms of the ethnic makeup? Because as you were saying, so many ethnic Russians are now moving there, Russian people with Russian passports. And so it's really complicating the sort of ethnic makeup of the city. I
think this is 100% a Russification project through and through. I mean, we see that they're doing it in these sort of basic ways, things like passport mandates, you have to have certain Russian documents to be able to access local services, things like that, not only rebuilding, but building the city sort of in Russia's image. Mariupol is twinned with St. Petersburg. So we see the St. Petersburg Naval Institute. There's a brand new neighbourhood that's appeared on the western edge of the city where there were open fields before, and it's called the Nevsky district after the Neva River in St. Petersburg. And I think that sort of the information space that we see around this is part of that. But I think there's a couple of key things to note in that, is that number one, it really gave me the sense as I was doing the story that the longer this goes on, the longer the sort of path to peace goes on, the harder it's going to get these territories out of Russian hands. And obviously we see from, what happened in Istanbul, the demand for more territory than they even occupy right now, that they have absolutely no intention of compromising on this. But Ukraine hasn't given up here. So I think it's part of this Russification project. And it's interesting when you hear the commentary coming out of Russia about the so-called information war. The head of the first deputy head of the presidential administration, Sergei Kirienko, he's a pretty sort of big feature of the social media propaganda efforts in the country, and also a point person for the occupied territories. He talks about the information war. He says, look, the hot war will end. The economic war will go on longer than that, but the information war is forever. So I think this is a project that is seen as a very long game for Russia.
And the content creation scores that you highlight, you profile in the piece, are actually really struck me that there are some quite scary parallels. So we have Trump bringing in his kind of cohort of social media influencers. We have Andrew Tate. We have, content creators like that in the West. Of course, we don't have anything on the scale of what you were describing in your article about Mariupol. Can you tell me, when you were writing that, did you feel a sense of sort of that actually are parallels to what's going on here in the West? Or is this, I guess it's sort of taking it one step further, a sort of dystopian level of content creation?
So I think there's an understanding in Russia of how powerful influencers and in particular sort of local voices are, and I think this gives you a sense of how sophisticated the Russification project is there, because experts I spoke to said that it's actually, even we see this in Russia, right? We see influencers being elevated, we see similar to sort of training programs, mentoring programs, almost sort of incubators that have clear links to the state, even state funded in some cases. But using it in the occupied territories is even more powerful, because then you have local voices speaking to local people and they're more likely to be believed. I think the other part of this is that sort of differentiates it from what's happening in the West is how young the people are that are being trained and offered these sort of free services. Even as young as sort of 14, we saw in some cases. And this is characteristic of what we see in how Russia seeks to maintain control over the occupied regions, but also within Russia as well. We've seen school curriculums updated as the war's gone on. They like to sort of try to harness the younger generation. These are the people who may end up fighting for Russia to breed loyalty. And if you offer something for free, like these training programs, that does increase the level of loyalty.
And how willing were people who were there, these content creators? So one of them that you spoke to, there's a video of you speaking to this man, which I thought was sort of amazing. In the article he spoke to you so, I guess, openly. Of course, what he was saying was very much, in line with his sort of propaganda views. But how willing was he to speak to you? How willing were these content creators to open up to you about what they're doing?
So this was interesting. We contacted over a dozen of these content creators through various different means. We expected 0 interviews and we ended up getting 2. So I think, the lesson there is ask. Always ask. Never be afraid of delving into what appears from the outside to be a black box of these occupied territories.
That was CNN journalist Claire Sebastian speaking to Monocle's Julia Lassica. You're with Monocle Radio. It's 8:41 in Oslo, 7:41 here in London. While Tesla sales are stalling across much of Europe, one country is bucking the trend. In Norway, sales of Musk's motors have jumped an eye-watering 213% in May alone. So what's driving this electric obsession? Is it smart policy, a love of tech, or just a national soft spot for Elon? Lars Bavanger, who is Monocle's Oslo correspondent, joins us on the line now. Lars, many thanks for coming on the show. Tesla is struggling across Europe, in Germany, France, the Netherlands. What's behind that dip?
Well, I think that Norwegians are definitely not very pleased about Elon Musk at the moment and his machinados in the US administration. But it would seem that the price of a car and the type of car will trump that. Excuse my pun, and people will go for the best bang for their bucks. And what has really driven this sales boom of Teslas in Norway recently is the new Tesla Model Y, which was just launched this spring, and it ticks a lot of boxes for Norwegians. It's big, you can fit the whole family in it. It's got 4-wheel drive, most of them, high ground clearance for those trips up to the mountain cabin, and it could tow a trailer. So that's what Norwegian car owners really are looking for, and it's competitive on price.
So how much of that success comes down to national policy? We know the Norwegian government's been really pushing the EV agenda. Are incentives still as generous as they used to be?
They're not as generous as they used to be. There is, for instance, now toll roads that are charging for EVs that used to be free. There's also less help from the government in terms of cheaper taxes on EVs. Now, basically the entire new car market is EVs in Norway, and I think the latest figures is 94% of all new cars are fully EV. And of course, for the government, that means they're going to have to cut the incentives, so they've reached their goal, but also they need the money for the national budget that car taxes bring in. If that only came from petrol cars, there would be no money to be had from new car sales.
Lars, thank you very much indeed. That's Lars Bavanger, Monocle's Oslo correspondent. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Now it's time to talk Asia news with Erin Cook, Jakarta-based journalist and author of Diary Mulut called Mulut, a newsletter about Southeast Asia. Erin, good to have you back with us. Global trade chaos. This is what the brand new leader of South Korea was addressing in his inauguration speech. Tell us more about what Lee Jae-myung said.
I know. I almost feel bad for him. So he's just won the election on just under 50% of the vote. So he does have not an overwhelming majority, but the support of much of the country after a few months of severe upheaval following last year's martial law attempt. So he needs to focus on stability. But when it comes to the global economy, stability is definitely not something that he can really control. So South Korea has been hit with 25% tariffs by President Trump and the US, which of course got that 90-day reprieve, but he's got to get straight to work. And he's focusing hard. He's saying, this is a fresh win, but this is my eye on the prize, and we're going to get South Korea through it all. Whether he can, of course, is another question.
Now, there are other troubles for people in South Korea because there are some countries there which fall under this new ban by Donald Trump to entering the US.
Yes, this is a bit of a tricky one, and it's certainly still breaking. So Trump has just issued another travel ban that includes a lot of countries from Africa and Middle East, but it's also included, interestingly, Myanmar, which is a bit of a curious addition to this list. Myanmar's been, the Myanmar junta, the military junta that seized power in 2021. A lot of those officers are the target of various sanctions by the US, the EU, and all sorts of other countries around the world. So it's not clear if a full blanket ban of Myanmar nationals is because of this or for some other reason. But it does make it even harder for Myanmar nationals who are looking for a bit of peace and quiet to get out of the get out of Myanmar rather, and head to the US, particularly for international students who had long seen education in the US as a ticket out of there and towards safety.
And Laos is also being affected.
Yes, Laos is even more tricky to me. I know that Laos is a bit of a black box when it comes to the economy, and the governing Communist Party's never been too open about what they're doing with their economy over there, and it has been also similarly the target of sanctions. But it's unclear why it has been included in the secondary list of not quite a blanket ban, but with very, very tight restrictions. And it's very unclear why Laos has been included there. Hopefully we find out more in the coming weeks, but as we know with Trump, we may never really know what the real motivation there is.
And it may be reversed, and there may be court challenges, as indeed there were when he tried to do this in his first term.
Exactly, yes. And I think it's really sad. We're talking not just in Myanmar and Laos, but all the other countries on the list. We're talking about parts of the world where people are very, very desperate and have very few opportunities. And to have had this major opportunity taken away by Trump on a whim is really a devastating thing to see.
Let's cross to the Straits Times now. And this is a great story about holidaymakers flocking to Penang as hotels offer all-you-can-eat durian deals.
Yes, I love this story because Penang is one of the great eating spots in Southeast Asia. It is just some of the best food in the entire world is found on that beautiful Malaysian island. But it might be particularly pungent in the next few weeks. Hotels are really hoping to build back up the tourism industry, which has still been quite sluggish after the pandemic. And with this durian harvest coming in, it's a free-for-all. You book your room and you also get an all-you-can-eat. And it's worked off really, really well. It's the they're reporting numbers 10 times higher than they'd usually see of hotel room occupation and visitors. And a lot of that has to do with Singapore being on school holidays. Everyone's headed up the road to get some durian from Penang.
Tell us about durian, though. I mean, it's fantastically and famously stinky.
It is, and I think it's a tricky one. A lot of foreigners that I know in Southeast Asia say once you're around the region enough, you do find it quite juicy. I find it quite, I don't love to eat it, but I do like the smell now. Once you're familiar with it, it's really nice. But at first, it does smell like gas, like there's natural gas leaking, which is why in much of the region, you're not allowed to take durian on to public transport and in hotel rooms and things where it does actually become a bit of a safety issue. But that doesn't stop people loving it. You can get your durian ice cream, your deep fried, any way you want it. They'll find a way to get it for you.
What does durian taste like?
It's the texture is something that I think is unique to durian. It is somehow creamy, but still quite sort of stable, I suppose. And it tastes very much like the smell. So if you do not like the smell, don't even try it. But there are ways of getting around sort of before diving straight into straight durian. Durian-flavoured ice cream, pancakes, that sort of thing, the infused stuff, that's a really good entryway. Here in Penang, they're just going straight for it. They're just carving up the durians and cracking in. But you can find plenty of ice cream and juice and all that sort of thing all over the whole region. And it's a wonderful export as well. As soon as China sort of opened its doors for durian, that was a gold rush for durian exporters in Indonesia, Thailand and Malaysia. And that's an industry that just keeps growing as demand in China ever grows as well.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed. That's Aaron Cook, who is a Jakarta-based journalist. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, after a decade of unofficial restrictions, China is finally letting K-pop back in. The ban, which began in 2016 after a diplomatic fallout over missile defence, quietly sidelined one of South Korea's biggest cultural exports. But with shifting geopolitics, economic incentives and a new South Korean president in office, Beijing seems ready to hit play again. Well, Bernie Cho is president of the Seoul-based K-pop agency DFSB Collective. He joins us now from Los Angeles. Bernie, many thanks to you. I know you've stayed up very late in order to speak to us, and we're very grateful. Can we start with the basics? Why was K-pop banned in China to begin with? And was that just K-pop or all Korean music?
As you duly noted, it was very much a geopolitical situation. And usually when there's political strife, in order to really sort of bring the pain points to the fore, you usually go after big exports. And in the case of Korea, the second largest consumer export goods out of South Korea is actually K-pop culture. Automobiles, for good reason, for obvious reasons, is number one, but it surprises a lot of people that K-pop culture, that includes TV, film, music, and video games, etc., is a $11 billion plus export. And it's very important to the Korean economy, not just for, revenues, but also for soft power. Perception is reality. And if China wanted to make a point, going after pop culture is not just for optics, but really for economic reasons. And this was a very painful stage for the K-pop culture industries. Now, that being said, a lot of the K-pop culture companies shifted their focus away from China towards North America and other parts of the world and did find success. But China still is very much a very important market to the Korean music, TV, film markets, industries. And so the fact that the second largest consumer export was struggling to get any traction in the second largest music market for Korean music was very painful for the past decade. But fortunately, over the past few weeks and the past few months, we've definitely started to see signs of both China and Korea preparing for a K-pop market opening. We've seen, for instance, Tencent Music Entertainment start engaging in very major investments in Korean music companies such as SM Entertainment. Their competitors, NetEase Cloud Music, was also starting to announce more direct deals with Korean music companies. And then also just chatter of Korean music acts starting to book concerts in the mainland. Up until now, any Korean music act that was thinking of performing in China pretty much had to reroute themselves to be Hong Kong or Macau. But the fact that the mainland may now become mainstream to Korean pop music is something that the industry has been patiently waiting for. And just a few hours ago, with President Lee Jae-myung, he just came right out of the gates in his inauguration speech where, and I quote, "K-culture's economy and national competitiveness, I will further grow Korea's cultural industry." I mean, this came out in his inauguration speech. And so the industry is moving away from cautious optimism to just optimism.
I mean, there was never an official ban on Hallyu, though. So what's changed? What's actually changed now?
Well, again, as you mentioned, it was sort of an unofficial kind of official ban. For instance, Korean music was still widely available on Chinese streaming music services, but where the impact of the ban really hurt and really hit was in live music. Korean music artists could not perform in the mainland, even though they might have tried and applied. They couldn't get visas to perform on the mainland, and that seems to be changing and shifting. There seems to be a warming in that space and in that regard. The other thing is just openly promoting and openly marketing in the Chinese music market was incredibly difficult. But we're already starting to hear signs of shows that are potentially being booked for later in the year. And so people are wondering and waiting and hoping that it'll open. Now, just a few weeks ago, there was a K-pop boy band made of all native Korean citizens who were scheduled to perform a concert in the end of May, but that was canceled at the last minute. But nonetheless, there have been just a lot of chatter among concert promoters of potentially bringing Korean music acts to the mainland. But again, with the perception that the new president is a little bit friendlier to the Chinese government, there's optimism that perhaps all the different restrictions and obstacles to getting access to a very important Chinese music market will soon be lifted. So, many people have their fingers crossed. And in many ways, I think with bated breath, waiting to see this quote unquote unofficial ban be lifted.
As you say, of course, as a tool of soft power for South Korea, K-pop is enormously significant. But why does it matter so much? Why does K-pop matter so much to China? Is it about popularity, pressure, or politics?
I think it's a little bit of everything and more. For instance, when we look at the Chinese music market, K-pop is the most popular international pop music genre in China. Another thing is that when we look at many of the deals that we're starting to see between Chinese music companies and Korean music companies, it's not just a simple straight content import or export. If anything, it goes a lot deeper. It's almost kind of sort of like a technology transfer, but instead of being chips or semiconductors or automobiles, it has to do with what we would call culture technology, where the Chinese are looking to Korean music companies to provide their know-how, their expertise, and their experience in production, and in return and in exchange, seeing these Korean-trained Chinese acts be marketed and promoted not only within China, but more importantly beyond China. There seems to be an effort and an outreach to create synergies. And what we're starting to see now is, for instance, the biggest Korean music company, HYBE, the home to BTS, they just announced a few weeks ago that they opened an office in China, in Beijing. And so many people are excited to see what these Korean music companies will do in China. And again, Chinese music acts, for whatever reason, if they've been trained in a K-pop band or in Korea, tend to become just mega superstars, not just in China, but across the region and beyond the region as well.
Bernie, in 30 seconds, give us one recommendation that we should all go and download immediately from the world of K-pop.
Oh, my goodness. You're asking me to pick a favorite child. I think right now, What's really interesting is the fact that with the recent presidential elections, and more importantly, a lot of the protests that occurred in Korea, a lot of K-pop songs became anthems and themes. And so if I had to, I can't pick one, but if I had to pick two, I would say aespa. Whiplash was a very popular song during this recent political season. And during the overthrow or the ouster of the previous Korean president, G-Dragon had a song called Crooked.
Bernie, that's great because G-Dragon is actually on our playlist, so stay listening and you'll have some of that a little bit later on. Many thanks there to Bernie Cho, president of the Seoul-based K-pop agency DFSB Collective, who was joining us from LA. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Laura Kramer, Tom Webb and Hassan Anderson, our researcher Francesca Gilks and our studio manager Elliot Greenfield. After the headlines, there's more music on the way and the briefing is live at midday in London. The Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.